Continuing King Arthur and His Knights by Elizabeth Lodor Merchant. The Sword of the King. And when matins and the first mass was done, there was seen in the churchyard, against the high altar, a great stone, foursquare, like unto a marble stone, and in the midst thereof was an anvil of steel, a foot on high, and therein stuck a fair sword, naked by the point, and letters that were written in gold about the sword, that said thus: Whoso pulleth out this sword of the stone and anvil is rightwise king, born of all England. And originally there was no church as part of it, or it was a church that was not a non-Christian church, because church from Hero Shrine and all that. In due time, Merlin kept his promise to King Arthur. It so happened that Gorlois, Duke of Cornwall, who had kept Ygerne shut up in the castle, was overthrown and slain in battle, and Arthur became owner of the castle. All that Merlin had promised now came true, and Arthur hastened to visit his beloved, winsome Ygerne, and to tell her that he loved her and he would always protect her. So she married him and became his queen. After the marriage, King Arthur Pendragon and his sweet and lovely lady Ygerne lived very happily in Tintagel Castle by the Cornish Sea. You may see the ruins of it now, but you can never imagine perhaps how fine and strong it was in those days, hundreds of years ago. Islam also uses the metaphor of a marriage as a fortress. Massive gray towers rose above great and gray roofs, and archers practiced shooting from the strong high walls. Sometimes the big gates and doors were closed, sometimes they opened wide to let out large companies of soldiers, dressed in bright armor and riding on handsome, spirited horses, with gay bridles and reins, happy. In the evening, sounds of music and laughter came from inside. Minstrels with harps playing and sang to the king and queen, and funny dwarfs in caps and bells made jokes or danced absurd little dances among the rushes on the floor. Oh, it was a wonderful place, was Tintagel, and you will never see anything like it nowadays. Folks were brave and cheerful then, and though they, no doubt, had terrific battles with their neighbors, they were so happy and courageous between times that their lives passed as happily as possible. What with work and play, banquets and tournaments, the knights loved and fought for the fair ladies. The fair ladies loved and looked after the knights. And bravest, most loving, and fairest of them all were King Arthur Pendragon and Ygerne the queen. As the days passed, they were very happy together at Tintagel, and by, their little son was born. Poor Ygerne was now told that Arthur had promised to give the baby instantly into Merlin's charge. She was very sad about this, but she would not ask the king to break his word. Besides, she and Arthur had often talked of the great future which Merlin had foretold for their child. So the king and queen kissed the baby prince, and the queen herself wrapped him up in a beautiful cloak of cloth of gold and gave him into the charge of 2 ladies and 2 knights. Then Arthur told the 2 ladies and the 2 knights to carry the tiny prince to a certain little half-hidden door in the castle wall, to open this door softly and silently, and give the child into the arms of somebody who would be waiting just outside to receive it. And the knights and the ladies give the tiny boy into the stranger's arms, sing little soft lullabies The two ladies stepped carefully down the corridor, followed by the two knights. They reached the winding stairs and went down, down, down to the little half-hidden door. On a golden cushion, one lady carried the sleeping baby in its golden cloak, the other carried a tall candle, and the two knights walking behind carried two more candles, taller still, which cast strange, wavering shadows on the gray walls. They opened the door, and the light of the candles shone out into the dark, still night. From among the shadows came a dim, tall figure, not unlike a shadow itself. This figure held out its hands for the baby, and the ladies and the knights, without a word, gave the tiny boy into the mysterious stranger's arms, and thus was Arthur. As soon as born, delivered at a secret postern gate to Merlin, to be holden far apart until his hour should come. Then they went back through the door with their candles and the empty golden cushion, and as they climbed up, up, up the winding staircase, they heard slowly dying in the distance the sound of the footsteps of a trotting horse. And imagine how it would have been if they handed it to the wrong person. Well, handed him to the wrong person. On the horse rose Merlin with the baby. Over the hill and dale he went until he reached a quiet small castle in a valley. Here lived a good and sober knight called Sir Hector, who knew well why Merlin had come. Long ago the magician and King Arthur had sent for Sir Hector and asked him if he would receive a little child into his house, a little child who was to become very great and famous, but who must be brought up simply as a noble knight's son. Sir Hector had consented, and had been given lands and riches in return. So when Merlin rode up in the dark night, Sir Hector and his wife met the magician gladly and took the baby straight to their own nursery. Then Merlin had the little prince christened Arthur. Yeah, the Arthurian legend comes before Christianity, apparently. But there could have been a 5th century, a post-Christianity Arthur that they merged into the story in the 500s when England, again, still wasn't Christian. So pre-Christianity, post-Christianity, if you're talking about a non-Christian people, what difference does it make, right? And Sir Hector brought him up in his own good, peaceful and happy home. The Irish and even Scottish nobility started to accept Christianity before the English. But Merlin was always at hand, watching over the boy. His father, King Arthur, was content to leave little Arthur in the great wizard's charge. However, when he was dying, he sent for Merlin and asked for news of the child. How happy he was when he heard that Prince Arthur was growing up into a beautiful little boy, already asking to ride his horse, hunt his hounds, and shoot his arrows with the others. How much better it was that he should latter be brought up just as a good knight instead of as a king's favored son. Arthur listened happily, certain now that his sacrifice of his baby had not been made in vain. Then he gave back to Merlin the round table, which, as you shall hear, had been placed in his care. The round table is actually a post-Christianizing element to this story, and told him how it might be kept safe and sound until Arthur came into his kingdom. Accordingly, Merlin had it carried far away to Cameliard, where it was placed in the care of an old friend of Arthur's, another great king whose name was Leodogran, who in his turn gave it into the charge of 250 knights, all of them brave, noble, and good. What happened to it afterwards you will hear in another story. So Arthur died, but nobody knew that the little lad in Sir Hector's house was the dead king's son and heir. The barons of the country began to quarrel tooth and nail among themselves. Each of them wanted the power to rule over the rest. Ne- Never was there such an uncomfortable commotion. Wherever you went, you would meet soldiers on horseback, shaking their spears and shouting out fine speeches about their own baron, and angry speeches about the barons of other people. The woods and the meadows rang with the sound of steel and the thunder of horses' feet, so that at last Merlin went to the archbishop, who mourned over these things very sorrowfully in his lonely palace of peace, and told him to call all the warring barons to London for Christmas, that they might go to service in the church and forgot their quarrels, if it were only for the short and gentle hours of Christmas Day. And certainly there could have been Yule celebrations and even Mithras Day celebrations, because it was Eurasian myth that was rather common. But Christmas, they did not celebrate Christmas. The barons dared not disobey the archbishop. So did London. Maybe that's why the story was allowed, was because it was Christianized. So to London and to the church they duly went. After the service, out streamed the congregation into the churchyard, and there they saw something that had assuredly not been visible when they went in. At the extreme east of the churchyard, lit by the pale Christmas sun, stood a stone as white as marble, but 1,000 times more beautiful. In the center of it was a square of steel like an anvil, and from the steel rose the glittering handle of a strong, sharp sword. In letters of gold about the sword were written strange and thrilling words which said that whoever could draw the sword out of the stone was King of Britain, Uther Pendragon's only rightful heir. The barons crowded around the stone, wide-eyed and amazed. Each called out that he, if given the chance, was certainly the one and only chieftain who could draw the sword from the stone. Smiling oddly, Merlin, who stood near, bade them all try. Jostling one another in their hurry, they sprang one by one to the side of the stone, seized the handle of the sword, and pulled and tugged with all their might. But their efforts met with no success. The sword did not even tremble in its square of steel, while the gleaming golden letters written around it seemed to mock the barons with their quiet, sure message. Well, the interaction of air and earth perhaps can't be so forced, right? At last the barons, tired and angry, went away from the churchyard and began to amuse themselves by holding a tournament in some meadows not very far away. After all, it was Christmas time. Well, it was Yuletide. The season for junketings, jousts, and knightly games, and riding to the tournament, as a matter of course, came Sir Hector, his son Sir Kay, and the fair and noble boy Arthur, whom Sir Hector loved as much as his own child. As they passed the churchyard, they saw the sword shining always in the stone that was like beautiful white marble, and they spoke to each other of the strangeness of the sight. They trotted forward, each on a handsome horse, but just as they were about to ride into the meadow, so bright with banners and happy voices, Sir Kay exclaimed in utter dismay that he could take no share in the delights of the tournament, for he had left his own sword at home. Swords can also represent discernment, but there are mystical experiences that evolve objects of those realms. "Turn your horse quickly, my son," said Sir Hector to young Arthur. "Gallop home and bring your brother's sword. You are too young for the knightly games, but he must go on, no account be left out of them." Arthur did not wait to be told a second time. Home he went at full speed to fetch his elder brother's sword, but when he reached the house, everything was lonely and locked up. Sir Hector's lady had gone to the tournament herself and had taken all the servants with her. For a minute or two, Arthur hesitated. Then he was struck by the very by the very happiest thought. I will go to the churchyard, said he, and I will take the sword that is sticking out of the big white stone. It will do just as well for my brother as his own. See, he had the right intentions rather than glory. He was just trying to be helpful. So he mounted his horse again, and off to the churchyard he rode. Dismounting, he hastened to the great stone. There, not even pausing to read the words which were written in the golden letters, he took the sword by the handle and pulled. Lo and behold, the sword came as easily and lightly from the steel in the middle of the marble as a rose plucked from a delicate green shelter of its bush. Sword in hand, Arthur once more sprang into the saddle and galloped away to the tournament. Over the meadowy grass he trotted, and straight into the hands of Sir Kay he gave the sword. Then, like the light-hearted, modest boy he was, he fell back among the other younglings, watching to see his elder brother's triumph with an eager and delighted expectancy. But Sir Kay was staring with all his eyes at the sword. He turned it this way and that, and rode off to where his father also watched from a distance. Sir, he said to Sir Hector, this sword which young Arthur has brought me is the very sword that no baron could draw from the stone in the east of the churchyard. You have heard what was written around it in letters of gold. Remember that story in Daniel? The letters written and thus interpreted. I have heard, said Hector, grave and startled, for he too had been told the story of the stone, set so firmly in the beautiful white stone. He too recognized the fair blade as it glittered in his son's hand. If this is so, sir, cried Sir Kay with a glowing face, then I must be king of Britain, other Pendragon's heir. But Sir Hector, deep in thought, had turned his horse's head. Call your brother Arthur, he said, and both of you follow me. In silence he rode to the churchyard, and in silence Kay and Arthur followed him. When they had all dismounted near the stone, Sir Hector looked at Arthur, who stood quietly by. Put the sword back again, said he, and Arthur did so. Sir Hector turned then to Sir Kay. Draw it out, he commanded. But Sir Kay, when he put his hand to the sword, could no more do this than any of the barons who had tried so hard. And Sir Hector himself tried, and also failed. Tenderly he laid his hand on Arthur's shoulder. It is your turn now. Show your brother the truth. So Arthur, still quite simply and naturally, reached out his young and quick fingers, and taking the sword for the second time from the shiny white stone, would have given it into Sir Hector's hand. But Sir Hector, instead of taking the sword, bent on one knee and did Arthur homage, as all good knights do homage to their liege lord and king. My son, said he, and that I cannot help calling you, though you were not my son. The writing in the golden letters was set down on the marble slab for you. Hail Arthur, son of Uther Pendragon, and king of Britain. Receive before all others the loyalty of those who love you best, Sir Hector, whom you have called father, and his son, your brother, Sir Kay.